So we will be looking at photosynthesis 8.3, pages 177 to 180. We'll be looking at the Kelvin cycle, and this is the light independent reactions. Kelvin cycle uses chemical energy in the ATP and NADPH and reduce carbon dioxide to sugar. This occurs in the stroma. And before we start, I want you to take a 2-question quiz. Bonus 2 points. Now, in the light-dependent reaction, we took the water and oxidized to oxygen. And the light energy was converted into chemical energy in ATP and NADPH. In Kelvin cycle, we will be taking the carbon dioxide and reducing it to carbohydrates, and the ATP and NADP, which has the energy, will be transferred to this. The hydrogen ions and the electrons will be transferred here, and these are regenerated. Now, the Kelvin cycle occurs in the stroma. That is the space in between the thylakoid membranes. We'll be looking at this part of the chemical reactions. This is the Kelvin cycle. There's a cycle. So there's a molecule which is being cycled in this one. Okay. Now, the Kelvin cycle has 3 phases. Phase 1 is carbon fixation. Carbon fixation is where you take inorganic carbon dioxide from atmosphere, which is air, and bring it into the cells and fix into the organic molecules. And the molecule which accepts the carbon dioxide is the one which cycles, and this is called as the ribulose bisphosphate. It's a 5-carbon sugar. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbon sugar with 2 phosphates on it. This is the one which will accept the carbon dioxide, and this process is facilitated by an enzyme called as ribisco. Ribisco is an enzyme which I think is the most important enzyme in this whole wide world, because it facilitates the fixation of inorganic compound from air into organic compound. Now a 5-carbon with a 1 carbon attached to it, it becomes 6 carbon. So 3 molecules of carbon dioxide, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is your RUBP, and this will, each one will take 1, so that becomes a 6 carbon, and then breaks into half immediately to form 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 3-carbon compound. Since the first stable compound after the carbon dioxide fixed is C3, the plants which use this process are called as the C3 plants. So the first step is fixing carbon dioxide, and this occurs through stomata. Stomata are the specialized cells underneath the leaves which will open and allow the gas to come in. The second step is the reduction of carbon dioxide into carbohydrates. So before that, this 3-carbon sugar, it actually takes ATP and takes the phosphate from ATP, and it is primed. It is 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. So this phosphate will activate this molecule, so it is ready to be reduced. So once this molecule gets ATP, each molecule gets 1 ATP, the NADPH will give its electrons and hydrogen ions, and it reduces the phosphoglycerate to glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. This is the product of the Kelvin cycle. So Kelvin cycle product is not glucose. It is glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Now, two of these will combine to form glucose. So a lot of the time we use glucose because it's easy to represent. But the product of Kelvin cycle is glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, one molecule. The rest of the 5 G3Ps, which is in the next, so 3 carbon dioxides will be reduced to 1, 2, 3. They're put together into a single molecule, which is a C3 carbon, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. The last step is the regeneration of the RUBP, because it has to go back and pick up 3 more carbons. Right? Each RUBP picks 1 carbon. So to regenerate, it uses ATP, and it will regenerate. So the 5 molecules of glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate will use the phosphate from ATP and becomes ribulose bisphosphate. So there are 3, again reviewing 3 phases. The first phase is fixing the carbon dioxide, which is in the air, into the tissue. So it actually comes into the tissue, and the RUBP is the acceptor, and the enzyme will facilitate that. Once it forms a 6 carbon molecule, it immediately breaks, and the most stable first compound which you find is C3 compound. And if the carbon dioxide directly comes in and forms this, those plants which undergo this process are called as the C3 plants. Then the this molecule is primed by ATP by adding phosphate, and then it is reduced to glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. One of it is converted into sugar, the rest of them are regenerated into RUBP. Now sometimes when it is very hot, the stomata is closed, and when the stomata is closed, there is no carbon dioxide source. So plants have adapted to this. Situation. There are 2 types of adaptation. One is done by the sugarcane and grasses, where they separate spatially. So you have 2 cells, mesophyll cell, which is connected to a bundle sheath cell. So during daytime, the carbon dioxide is taken in at a much higher rate. So a lot of CO2 is quickly taken into the mesophyll cell during the daytime, and it is stored because it cannot be used immediately. There's too much CO2. So it is stored in an organic molecule, which is a C4 molecule. And once the stomata close, this organic molecule, which stores carbon dioxide, will release CO2 for Kelvin cycle. Since the carbon is fixed into C4 compound, these plants are called as C4 plants. Now another way to fix this is by temporal separation, that is the time, night and day. Some plants like pineapple, during the night the stomata are open and the carbon dioxide enters the mesophyll cell, and it is stored in organic molecule in the night time. During the daytime, the stomata is closed. But we already have stored carbon dioxide in organic molecule, which we did in the night. So in the daytime, even though the stomatas are closed, the stored carbon dioxide can be released and used for the Kelvin cycle. These are called as CAM plants, and this is another way to store. So overall, if you look, the light reactions are carried out by molecules in the thylakoid membrane. They convert light energy into chemical energy of ATP and NADPH, and the water splits and releases oxygen, and this is a source of electrons. In the Kelvin cycle, they take place in the stroma, and ATP and NADPH are used to reduce carbon dioxide to G3P, and the ADP inorganic phosphates are regenerated. So the water comes from the roots all the way to the leaves, and the sugars which are produced will be transported for further usage. So going back, the reactants for the Kelvin cycle will be carbon dioxide, 3 molecules of carbon dioxide. The energy source will be the ATP and NADPH. This occurs in the stroma, and the carbon is picked up by RUBP, and this is facilitated by Rubisco enzyme. The product is the G3P, and the byproducts, these are the regeneration of the ADP and IP and NADP. They are recycled, and RUBP is regenerated. Now in the next video, we'll look at how this G3P is used. What happens to the product of photosynthesis?